Welcome to Designing for Humans in the Loop podcast, where we discuss the intersection of AI and design. I'm Justin Hevey, and alongside me is Taryn. We created this podcast because we're curious about the intersection of design in the evolving landscape of AI and how AI is reshaping design and transforming our professional landscape. Today, we'll be talking about hyper-personalisation with our special guest, Barry Saunders. Barry is a partner at MXA Consulting, a technology strategy consultancy, where he serves clients on customer experience, product strategy, data and analytics. And we're thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to Barry today. Welcome, Barry, to Designing for Humans in the Loop podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, like you said, I'm a consultant. These days I do a lot of work for clients who are grappling with data and AI and kind of the broader challenge of how they serve their customers using these tools. My background originally is in user experience. So I spent many years working as a UX architect, customer experience designer, and then more of a product strategist over recent years.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Barry. Really excited to be talking to you. So how would you describe hyper-personalisation to people?
I mean, it's a very broad area. I often talk to clients who want to do personalisation, which is everything from very basic segmentation through to conversion optimization, through to product recommendations, all the way through to, I guess, hyper-personalisation being potentially a mix of a number of different ways of personalising an experience. So for me, when I talk to people about that, what I'm trying to establish is where on that spectrum are they interested in playing? Are they looking at doing things like product recommendations? Are they looking at using fairly basic algorithms to provide a personalized experience to their customers? Are they more interested in segmentation? And what are the other factors they need to consider? So if they are in retail, they probably also want to consider things like conversion optimization, merchandising, brand strategy, product strategy, that sort of thing. So I would think of anything where you're bringing in kind of a set of different algorithms to kind of create a personalized experience to be on that spectrum.
And why has this become so relevant to companies today? Is this the Netflix effect?
Look, Netflix has definitely, obviously done a lot of really interesting work in this space. Their work to develop product recommendations or viewing recommendations very early on was a bit of a trailblazer in this place. Obviously, they had, I think, notoriously had something like 300 data scientists working on the very interesting challenge, which is how do you, if you have an enormous backlog of content, how do you make sure somebody who comes to watch something gets the thing that they want to watch very easily? I think it's become much more kind of prevalent now for a number of reasons. One is that the technology to be able to do personalized content has come a long way. It's vastly easier to have systems that will write copy for you based on a set of kind of inputs out of the box now. There's also the factor that we live in a world where the economy is quite globalized. And so being able to reach people with product offerings that are relevant is one way to compensate for the fact that if you're selling dresses or T-shirts or widgets, you're competing against everyone across the world rather than the people in your local area. I will say that there have been people who have gone a long way down the path of personalization and found, for their particular business, there's a level of personalization that helps and a level that is probably too far. So I think people are figuring out where on that journey they need to be.
How does AI enable hyper-personalization?
AI is a very broad bucket of technologies, and I'm going to be a little pedantic on this one because, I am a consultant. That's my bread and butter. If we think about AI, the last, let's say, 8 years, a lot of that was kind of the machine learning space of being able to do things like offer product recommendations. So systems that would look at my purchase behavior, match me to customers that look like me. Somebody who's bought 3 black T-shirts and a pair of black jeans. Okay, Barry's bought 3 black T-shirts. He's probably going to buy a pair of black jeans. That sort of product recommendation, next best action, customer lookalikes, all of that sort of stuff grew out of, like I said, the last 8 years of machine learning. as the technology has progressed, what we've seen with stuff like Gen AI is the ability to create content based on a set of inputs. So the GPTs of the world are very good at creating content that looks like a particular model. So you can train it on a tone of voice, for example. And there's a lot of tools out there that retailers can use for this. You can feed a GPT model your brand copy, tell it what words you like and don't like, the tone of voice, etc., and it can learn that very easily. And then what makes it very easy to do is to give it a set of structured data inputs and it'll write content based on that. So, for example, writing product description copy based on a set of data points is trivial now. Being able to write a personalized email that speaks to me the things that I'm interested in the brand tone of voice is stuff that can now be done with software systems. So that's where a lot of this interest is coming from, especially in a world where you're trying to differentiate through brand and through content and through trying to reach people where they are. Being able to create personalized content and personalized experience is a good way to reach those people.
Can you speak a little bit about your experience in this space?
I've worked with these kind of tools quite a bit through my career, working on video streaming platforms, so implementing things like content recommendations, building kind of customer segments based on viewing patterns. I've also worked on kind of more the industrial application of these tools, so things like preventative maintenance systems for big industrial clients. In recent years, I worked as the Chief Product Officer at Oroton, which is an Australian fashion brand. And so some of the work that we did was identifying areas where we could use these tools to automate some aspects of the content production work. So the first one, obviously, is the one I alluded to, which is writing product recommendations. When you have a new range of clothing come out, there's often hundreds of items of clothing that will come with a set of data points around the product description. Writing all of that copy in a particular tone of voice can take weeks. And with the kind of accelerating fashion cycle and increasingly bringing promotional periods forward, there's always a crunch to get that stuff written. ChatGPT tools are a good way to kind of accelerate that sort of thing. The other one that's quite interesting, which we had not implemented while I was there, but one that we were looking at, was actually using these tools to generate metadata based on image inputs. So obviously when you do product photography for a fashion brand, there's a lot of copy that's written that's very kind of brand oriented. No one ever sells a brown handbag. You might have a whiskey or you might have a tobacco, or the words that are used in the brand copy obviously reflect the brand. But computer systems will often look for the more generic terminology when they're trying to drive search outcomes. So being able to take the image inputs and generate a set of search metadata and tagging metadata, and also just create a set of kind of descriptors that you can search using another image, is a great way to help customers kind of find what they're looking for. So some of the tools that we were looking at would allow a customer to come to the site and upload a photo of a dress that they liked from anywhere and search using kind of image search within our site for products that are similar. That allows you to also do things like, if you have a stock out on a product, immediately show something that's similar that we do have stock in.
Very fascinating. So what companies are executing well in this space?
It's early days for a lot of this stuff. So I think the technology is moving so fast that some people are taking kind of a wait and see approach, which absolutely makes sense. I mean, 12 months ago, you could build something that 6 months later was available for free in the basic kind of ChatGPT interface. So I think that there's a bit of hesitancy about trying to develop too much using these tools. The challenge that we see a lot is people will come to us with a desire to do something around AI and their data infrastructure is not set up to do it effectively. AI is built on data, and if you don't have your data organized, you can create a lot of quite adverse outcomes. There's also hesitancy around what you're using this stuff for. So getting a product description wrong has a pretty limited impact. misdiagnosing somebody's x-rays has a massive impact. There's also kind of a lot of work to figure out what use cases are safe to use this stuff for today and deferring some of the higher risk stuff. What I have seen quite effectively is in retail. Retail, there's always staffing challenges. It's very, very lean budgets. You have to deal with a lot of kind of complexity in retail, and being able to automate some of this stuff that is just time consuming allows people to kind of focus on more of the kind of creative aspects of the job. There are some interesting things happening in retail, particularly around like customer care. Mm-hmm. I've seen some retailers where they run kind of drop ship marketplaces where they may have tens of thousands of suppliers. Being able to actually do customer support for a business like that's incredibly hard. But being able to automate it through tools like AI to be able to actually read through 10,000 supplier documents and be able to find the right answer can be quite efficient.
Wow. Some really good examples in the retail and healthcare space. Are there any trailblazers out there in Australia, New Zealand?
So what I have seen that looks quite interesting is some of the legal AI companies are doing some really interesting stuff. We've seen quite a few of those come through. There's a few that are based in Australia that we've spoken to who are doing some really interesting stuff around the creating contracts. You've seen LawPath have built some kind of interesting tools to allow you to write contracts quite easily. There are other ones out there that we've seen where they can take an input of a whole set of documents, synthesize and build like a timeline out of them, which is obviously a key input in a court case. So there's some good stuff happening there. Obviously, there's that image generation that just got acquired by Canva. So there is some really interesting stuff happening in Australia.
Yeah, Leonardo is the one you're thinking of, Barry.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
It's amazing. We've got two incredible companies, Canva and Leonardo, really pushing generative AI or AI from a creative perspective. Yeah. So, Barry, as we study to think about hyper-personalisation, AI, generative AI, how do designers start to think about designing for hyper-personalisation? What are the core elements a designer should be thinking about, or maybe broader teams? You've touched on a few things previously around SKU description updates, and I can imagine the amount of time saved for teams in doing that, whether it be a UX writer or a content writer. What are some of those elements a designer could be or a team could be thinking about?
It's been a long time since we've been able to wireframe something and know exactly what content's going in there. I think anyone who's ever worked on a news website or any kind of editorial piece knows you're designing in anticipation of content. So in some respects, the hyper-personalisation thing is really just kind of that amplified by another magnitude. What I have always suggested to people working in this space is it's always good to look across industries. This sort of thing, you can learn a lot from people who work on editorial publications, so content editors, news editors. Something I found when I moved into retail was that what I thought of as UX and what is commonly called customer experience in retail is quite different. It's a very different industry, but you are dealing with customer care. The call center is a much bigger factor in the customer experience of retail. You are thinking a lot more about the experience of browsing rather than trying to get to a defined endpoint. So this kind of entertainment piece around the experience of shopping is something that comes through a lot more. So kind of undirected user journeys where maybe the endpoint is not as defined. But I think the areas where if you were wanting to learn more about this stuff that I would think about is learning about content strategy, learning about editorial strategy, learning the kind of different ways in which product is merchandised in retail. So, in retail, there's a whole job which is merchandising, which is kind of, if you think about customer experience, there's always a thought around hierarchy on a website or on a journey. Merchandisers are thinking about that initially from the store level, you walk into the store, you see the product, what product are you likely to buy, what products are you likely to put together. The web experience of a retailer is often driven by kind of merchandising concerns and kind of like ranging and the overall brand piece. So understanding how that thinking works, combined with things like how do you drive people to a purchase, like conversion optimization, and then thinking about what does the user want to see and what's going to reflect what that user's interested in. When you start doing this, you're kind of trying to layer on different lenses of looking at the customer and serving the customer. So it's important to kind of build a set of personas that reflect things like content preference, channel preference, product preference, and then kind of build these personas so when you actually populate these experiences, you can kind of see that you haven't created something that feels weird or looks weird. So like you don't want to over optimize for the things that sell really well, because then you'll have all of like the $10 umbrellas showing up on the homepage. Unless you're a cut price retailer, in which case maybe that's what you want, right? But you want to be able to test things and make sure it doesn't look odd. The other one is what happens if you're a new customer, you've only bought one product. Are your algorithms going to try and over-index on that, and suddenly you come to the website and all you see is 500 black t-shirts and nothing else, right? You got to think through the different states and the different types of customers you're going to have and make sure the experience continues to work.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, there's lots to unpack there in terms of what a designer needs to do, and it's moved well beyond just simple wireframes. And obviously, it's probably been that like for a while. But you're even touching on product and the business side of things around a designer. You can't just sort of think, well, what does the customer need once they enter the website? It's like, well, how many SKUs? What have they previously brought? But also, what's the business trying to achieve potentially as well, right? And where do the challenges lie for that in a designer? How do they, broaden themselves across the business, or do they need to focus on how they capture all of these dimensions you mentioned? And then obviously there's a testing aspect here as well of how do you actually, validate some of these sort of hyper-personalisation experiences.
I mean, for a designer, I think it's important to kind of understand like the industry that you work in. And I see it a little too much where designers will walk into an industry they don't know and assert that they're the voice of the customer and not recognize that, this business has existed for 100 years. This industry has existed for 300 years. It has served customers this whole time. UX is a good framework for understanding a customer, but there are many frameworks. And, if you go in and assert that this business has never known how to serve customers before, you're not going to get a lot of buy-in from the people who've been designing clothes for 50 years. So there's a bit of like humility and needing to understand the business you're in and how customers act in that business. A customer going out to buy a party dress is not necessarily going to act in the same way as somebody going to buy a laptop. They may be the same person, but like the way we think about a customer is you've got to adapt to the business you're in. I think the other one is you've got to understand, like design to me is at the intersection of what are the kind of human things that don't change very much, human needs, human desires, human behaviors. What are the specific kind of business needs of the business or the industry you're in? And then what can you do with the technology that's available to you? Now, I think you can have a very productive debate about the morality of some AI tools. I personally have opinions about it myself. But as a designer, part of your job is to understand the capabilities of those tools. And if you see a very useful tool that's available to you, you got to have a position on that is somewhat separate to the moral judgment. So that to me is kind of where a designer needs to play, is to actually understand the business that they work in, understand what is fundamentally human and what behaviors people exhibit kind of in that industry, and then how can you reach them using the tools at your disposal. So it's not to say you need to understand how AI works any more than every designer needs to understand how to code, but they certainly need to understand the abilities of that technology and what they can do with it.
Yeah, it's how do you start to shape that new medium potentially, if you'd like to call it that. There's a lot there. Again, there's so much for a designer it almost feels like a designer's learning more and more, year by year about how they understand. But to me, there's so much also opportunity for designers as well, right? How do you think traditional methods and approaches are stacking up against all of these new technology or AI or all of these different dimensions? Do they still stack up? Does anything change there in your mind in terms of, learning new testing approaches, methods?
So, look, some things will never change, right? Like humans are humans. There's certain psychological motivations that people have. There are certain human factors that you always have to take into account. If somebody is going to spend a substantial amount of money, a substantial amount of their paycheck on a purchase, then they're going to be cautious about it. They're going to want to understand what they're getting, right? That sort of thing, like reassurance. Those kind of psychological factors don't change. People are easily distracted. People are busy. Most people will at some point in their life have accessibility challenges. All of that stuff is true and will remain to be true. I think a big one for AI stuff that people forget is that design is about, it's rendering intent, but it is also providing affordances to users to understand what a system can do. And I think one of the big failures of a lot of the AI stuff out there right now is it doesn't tell you at all what it can do. Like a chatbot is not a set of affordances. It's a window and you can ask things, but it doesn't really tell you much about what it can do, what it can't do. And because it's stochastic, right? Like it's probabilistic, you're not going to get the same answer back every time. So sometimes it'll tell you it can't do something when it absolutely can. So there's a whole piece in there about actually design has a really big job to do to actually make these systems into products and make them legible. In terms of what you can do with these tools, the best analysis I've seen of stuff like ChatGPT is that in a way it's a digital twin of almost all of the textual output of a civilization.
Mm.
And if you think of AI as not intelligent, but actually like a model of textual output that actually allows you to think about what can you do with it. Like you're not asking questions of an intelligence. You are using a system that allows you to model what other things look like. And so asking a question that requires intelligence to answer is not a helpful way to do it. But if you say, well, look, here are examples of bodies of text that I want you to think about, now create one that uses these inputs. That's really good, right? That doesn't actually require something to be smart. It just requires you to think about what do you actually want the outcome to be. The really interesting stuff is, well, if you've got a system that can tell me, actually, these two documents are covering 90% of the same area, tell me where they've diverged, but tell me the meaning of where they've diverged. That's a really interesting thing. You can do a lot in insurance and law with that kind of capability. Where it gets really, really interesting for designers is you can, if with a bit of thinking, you can effectively model how an audience might respond to a proposal. This isn't, again, asking a system to be intelligent. It's asking a system to model, in general, how people have responded to proposals online to get a sense of, well, if I come up with a policy proposal and I ask this system to actually recognize that, there's 100 people here from a range of different political backgrounds and a range of different concerns, give me a rough statistical set of responses so I can kind of work through in my head how people might react to my proposal. That's really interesting. It doesn't replace talking to actual people, but it certainly helps you refine a proposal before you get to that point.
Mm. So it seems to me that all of our methods and approaches and frameworks that we have, they're still a great tool. We've just got this sort of augmented tool now that can really sort of move this process at exponential speed, which is good as well, but it can sort of kind of be daunting. But I just want to dive into one last topic here on data-driven design for designers. What does this mean for designers, and how should they be thinking about data-driven design? Who should they be working with across an organisation? Because I think it's an important aspect for designers not to think that they need to do this all themselves. So who do they collaborate with?
I mean, everyone is the glib but true answer. I'd like to think we're long past the days of designers creating a set of Photoshop files and throwing them over the fence at the engineers. Though sometimes I wonder. I would say if you're in an organization where there's a team that uses Canva and a team that uses Figma, you should be talking to that other team a lot, right? Because they are also doing design, marketing, CRM, conversion optimization, content strategy, editorial, merchandising. All of these are jobs that hit design. To say nothing of product, right? Like I think the product versus design kind of debate has been done to death. But if you're not working closely with product and engineering in the first instance, what are you doing? There's just no getting away from the fact that content is just a huge part of the job. And that's everything from if you work in a SaaS business where every flow is a very definitive outcome, then certainly the kind of micro copy working through the affordances of this kind of more text-based input. But if you're in any business where you've got CRM, where you've got customer service, where you're selling stuff, then you need to be working with your content people and actually broaden the horizons of what you think of as UX to include things like content and CRM and all of these different touch points that customers go through. I mean, your paid and performance advertising is another touch point, and it's rare that you really see designers think about that, except as like potentially like the little dot at the start of their customer journey. But it's just a bigger part of it as everything else.
You're really touching on this. So many different aspects now a designer needs to consider, not just design and the customer. It's the product, it's the business. What are all the data points across that business that play a part into developing a sort of this hyper-personalised or a personalised experience for a customer?
You mentioned that irrespective of your moral standing or your ethical view on certain things, designers still need to formulate an opinion. And is this in relation to the capability of the tool, or are there other aspects to that as well that they need to consider?
You could have a reasoned perspective that you feel that ChatGPT is a copyright rip-off engine. I think there's a lot of justifiable argument that says there's an issue with training these models on artistic output. I think especially when you see image generators where it's trivial to replicate the hard-won talent of visual designers, absolutely, And I think there's absolutely a case for people in that industry feeling like that they have had their work. I think if you look historically, this is not a new debate, right? Like, I play music as a hobby, and if you go back far enough, people were upset that someone was writing down music and selling sheet music. People were upset that music was being recorded because that meant live musicians were not getting work. The debate around sampling is still within all of our lifetimes, that, was sampling ripping off people's work? And there's a legal framework for paying people for that now, but for a long time there was not. Now we're kind of getting to the point of, well, there's AI tools where I can upload a song and it'll split that song into different layers, and it'll give me a drum sample that's based on, I can write an input to some of these things and it'll give me a set of drum samples that are based on, MF Doom's first album, right? That's amazingly fun. But, there's a history of sampling and this stuff being used. The guy who made the Amen break never got paid for it. That's like an entire genre of music right there. But is AI just the next step on an existing trend, or actually is it fundamentally different, right? We could have a very long-running argument about this, and I would be happy to. I think as a designer, you need to be able to separate out having a really clear view of what a technology can do, and also have a lens of, is it okay to use that technology? If you're a designer and you're working outside of software, then you have to make these decisions all the time. Fabrics, do I use polyester versus wool, right? All of these things have an impact. If you're a software designer, you've never really had to make those decisions before now, except maybe if you were doing like really hyperscale things that involved a lot of power generation, or if you were investing in crypto. So you still have to make moral choices. But where I find a lot of designers do themselves a disservice is they've never seriously grappled with the capabilities of a technology before immediately dismissing it. Like, I see a lot of people talk about AI as being a stochastic parrot, as it being like a dumb system that just provides things that look real. And that's not an unreasonable critique, but it misses the fact you can do a hell of a lot with a system that does that. And it just annoys me when people abdicate their role as designers where they need to understand the capabilities of technologies that people use. That's part of the job.
It's just brilliant, because what I'm also hearing is you saying that designers need to develop their critical thinking skills and their ability to actually layer in different lenses from business to technology and other lenses as well into being able to formulate that opinion.
I mean, being a designer is an immense privilege. We get to work at the intersection of what it means to be human, what you can do with technology and where the future is taking us. And, you know, the primary organizations that we use to structure our economy and our society. Like, the thing I've always loved about design is I get to play at the intersection of those things. Sometimes I feel like there are designers out there who 15 years ago realized that they could get a job in technology by doing boxes and lines on a page and never grappled with anything other than that. And so, like, you do have to engage with the job that you have. And sometimes that means making hard decisions.
Yeah. And changing your stance as well on things.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, like, some of the debates around this stuff are not new. Like, I've designed banking home loan systems and made it easier for people to get home loans. And guess what? The people whose job it was to navigate those systems, do it on your behalf, and spent 6 months learning how to use those really awful, complicated systems, well, they felt threatened because that was their job. They'd built their expertise in operating bad systems. The AI wasn't part of that conversation. That was just design. You know, like, when we design things, when we design automated systems, it has an impact on people's jobs. If you're not comfortable with that, then maybe, like, that is part of the job of design.
So true. So the third question, and I have a feeling you've already answered this and you've covered off a lot, but let me get into it. So on our last episode, we had Chris Rawlings talk about T-shaped designer and developing your toolkit. So for designers, what skills can they add to their toolkit? And I've heard you already speak about content design strategy and critical thinking and understanding the business and understanding the industry. Is there anything else you'd add to that?
If someone said they were an engineer, you wouldn't expect them to know everything from mechatronic engineering to building bridges to controls interfaces for nuclear power plants to software design. But those are all engineering disciplines, right? I think design is an overarching discipline that has a lot of sub-disciplines. And I'm not going to get into the debate about CX versus product design versus UI, etc. But you should know your specialization, and you should know the kind of ancillary roles around it that make you effective. If you work in retail and e-commerce, you need to know content, you need to know CRM, you need to know MarTech and conversion optimization. Not necessarily so well that you can do those jobs, but certainly so you can work with those people. Whereas if you work in banking, it's going to be a different toolkit. You're going to need to understand cybersecurity and risk profiles and anti-money laundering and conversion optimization as well. But, like, there's kind of groupings of skills that I think are important. So in those respects, knowing how people act, like knowing those fundamental human truths, knowing the base, like the technology that you use day to day is important, but also kind of knowing the set of industries that you serve and the relevant skill sets in that space.
And in terms of design methods, are they still relevant or do they need to be tweaked?
Methods are great, processes are great, but not as a replacement for thinking. And I see way too many designers who, get asked to design a sign-up page and say they're going to need to do 6 weeks of discovery. It's like, that's kind of a solved problem. Like, having the sense to know when to use a method and when to develop a method and when to just use logical problem solving is important. But if you think about the basic design toolkit as customer interviews, ethnographic analysis, user testing, all of the great tools of human computer interaction and heuristics and all of that sort of stuff, incredibly important. That stuff doesn't change. Now, as I said earlier, does ChatGPT meet all of those kind of guides? No, maybe it's not especially well designed. Is there going to be a new kind of design paradigm for this stuff? Possibly, but those tools are still going to be helpful to get us there. So yeah, I think the toolkit's still very important. I just think frameworks and toolkits and methods have never ever been a replacement for thinking. So we just need to make sure we use them, but also think critically about them.
I love that, Barry. I wish we could print that off and put it on a t-shirt or a mug or something.
I want to have some friends left when this podcast goes out. So.
I could just sit here and keep talking to you forever because I just love everything you have to say. It's, a breath of fresh air.
As we wrap up our conversation, Barry, what would be the one takeaway design could be thinking about now to adapt to this new and evolving landscape, for example? What opportunities exist for designers in this space in the coming years, potentially?
Here's what I would say. Design is an incredible privilege. You get to work at the intersection of a lot of really interesting things. We're working through a big technology change, which is always kind of exciting. I was a designer when the iPhone came out, and that was, fascinating. I'm sure all of us had to help different clients figure out how to put things on a tiny little device, right? There's always really interesting work in this space, but it is also an industry that's 20 years old, 30 arguably, maybe 40 if you include early kind of human-computer interaction, right? The knowledge base changes in software development every 5 years. So you would expect design is also going to have to do that. So it is kind of there's always a lot to learn. There's always a lot of change. So that's, both exciting and scary. But the tools that I've seen are also very helpful for doing design more effectively. 5-10 years ago, people freaked out that design systems became quite common. And I remember people arguing that, that was the end of UX design. Everyone was going to use a design system. And of course, people did start using design systems, but there's still a hell of a lot of design work. We don't want everything to look the same. It just raises the baseline, I think. And God knows, there is always going to be a need for design work. We have all the tools we have today, and yet still half the things you use are broken, don't work the way you expect to. There's always going to be work. It may not be the work that it was yesterday. The job may change, but the world always needs people to help kind of bridge the gap of what people want and what businesses need and what technology can do. That's a pretty exciting place to be.
One thing that design's always good at, or designers are good at, we're good at being curious, aren't we, I think? And I think that holds us in good stead to continuing to evolve and adapt. Barry, thanks for joining us today in this wonderful conversation and discussion around hyper-personalisation and more broader in design and who being a designer in this day and age. So where can people find you, Barry?
Well, I don't have a lot of social media presence anymore. As I have gotten older, I've stopped kind of posting as much online. MXA.com.au is our website, and you can find links to all of our socials from there.
Well, thank you, mate. Appreciate that. Thanks for listening to Design for Humans in the Loop. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Barry.
you.
Thank you so much.